practicing Buddhist for 13 years, and I also have an undergraduate and graduate degrees in religious studies, focusing mostly on Chinese religions and Buddhism. So the Buddha was a man who lived about 2,500 years ago. He was born in Nepal, and he was born to a king of a really powerful man. Who there was a prophecy when the Buddha was born. This wise man said he will either be a great political leader, a great warrior, or a great religious leader. So his dad said, I want him to be a king and follow in my footsteps. So he did everything he could to shield his son from suffering. He wouldn't allow sick people to go near him. He surrounded him with opulence and all kinds of sensual pleasures. And so the Buddha thought that only good things existed until basically he saw these sights. He was taken out in the city, and he saw suffering. He saw old age, sickness, and death. He had 4 sights. He saw old age, sickness, death, and then he saw a mendicant, like a wandering ascetic. You know what asceticism is? Like someone who willingly, who doesn't eat, who wears rough clothing, who doesn't sleep on a raised bed. Someone who suffers on purpose to reach some kind of spiritual state. So he saw one of those people, and he had a realization that what he was experiencing wasn't real, and he set out on his own, achieved enlightenment, and then spent the next 40 years teaching.
And did they write down what he said?
It wasn't written down originally. When the Buddha lived, it wasn't important to write things down. They didn't view it as important. So he had his cousin, was an early convert, and he went with him to every sermon that he gave. He was like his secretary, basically. And he is known throughout the ages for having an excellent memory. So he memorized every sermon that the Buddha gave. And after the Buddha died, the head monks basically all got together. Ananda recited what he remembered. Other people recited what they remembered. They came to sort of an agreement on the contents of all of the Buddha's lectures, and then basically all memorized them. They use a lot of mnemonics, and like you can see there's a lot of repeating patterns in these old texts, so that they were easily memorized. And then after a few hundred years, other religious traditions in India started writing things down. The Buddhists felt like in order to stay relevant,
I was gonna say.
relevant, they would need to do that also. So they went ahead and recorded in writing those things.
All right, so today, is there a kind of one text or a variety of texts or no texts that have followed?
So there is, it's a very complicated issue. There's a massive amount of writing in Buddhism. There's several different categories of Buddhist texts. There's the oldest, what's considered to be the oldest, which are like the Theravada texts, the texts that are in Pali language, which are these texts that I was saying were remembered and recorded. And then there's also stories in there about the lives of monks from around the Buddha's time, and then a philosophical system which like lays out this really detailed psychology. It's like the oldest psychological system that's recorded there. Then there's newer texts that are Mahayana texts, come starting around the turn of the millennium to the Common Era, and so there's just a vast. This is the largest category. Just these long scriptures. They're short and long. Just tons of different ones that were all written in different languages. These some of the most popular scriptures, like the the Heart Sutra and the Lotus Sutra are part of this category. The Diamond Sutra, these Prajnaparamita, these great wisdom scriptures. And then there are also the Vajrayana texts of the Tibetans that are mostly written in Tibetan and a variety of other languages.
Alright.
Altogether, it's just a vast, huge amount, and individual people and different traditions usually focus on one text or a group of texts instead of ever trying to include all of them, because it's just way too much. So he's called Gautama Buddha. That was his name, or Siddhartha Gautama was his name. Shakyamuni, he was of the Shakya tribe, so Shakyamuni is this name that's like the honored one of the Shakya clan. Anyhow, so you'll see those. You'll see statues of the future Buddha, Maitreya, very common. That's the big fat Buddha who, and the reason he is fat is because he represents prosperity. So when you have a lot of wealth and food to eat, you get fat with all the food. You'll see a lot of statues of Amitabha Buddha, who's the Buddha of the Western Pure Land. And then there's another category of being called a bodhisattva, and there are innumerable different bodhisattvas. There are 4 main ones, but you'll see statues of all different kinds. The most common one is Avalokiteshvara or Guanyin. You'll see all kinds of statues of her. But then there's one who sort of watches over travelers, and there's one who goes down to hell to rescue hell beings, and all kinds of different bodhisattvas. And then you also see statues of prominent practitioners. So.
Did you say her? Buddha
Yes.
can be a girl?
Avalokiteshvara in India was a man, but then became a woman in China. So through China and Japan, she is a woman. There is a female Buddha in Tibet named Tara. So there are female and male statues. The Buddha is decidedly a man. I mean, there's no question about that. So there are multiple Buddhas. The Buddhists see the universe as existing in infinite space. Is this an infinite space and infinite time? So there's these infinitely repeating cycles, and the cycle of that repetition is called a kalpa. And so a kalpa is said to be it's just an incredibly vast amount of time. Kalpa is said to be the amount of time. So if you take a mountain that's as tall as Mount Everest, and every 10,000 years a bird with a piece of the finest silk flies over the mountain and drags the silk across the top. At the time when that mountain has been completely worn down, that is a kalpa. So for each kalpa there is a Buddha. And so in our kalpa there is Shakyamuni Buddha. In the future kalpa, Maitreya Buddha will reach enlightenment, and it's because it's said that in that time the Buddha's teachings will die out. So the next Buddha comes along to introduce those teachings to the world again. So in previous lives, our Buddha encountered the previous Buddha, and he was set on his path at that point. So there are lists of names of past Buddhas. I think there are some lists that have like 20 names, but those names would have existed in such an inconceivably long time ago that it's almost